All right, good afternoon, viewers. It's good to have all of you back. We're here for another series of what we call the partner spotlights. These are the people who make things happen for game. Um, and today we've got MakerGhat and specifically Azra joining us for this conversation. Azra, which city are you in currently? I know you all are all over the world all the time.
Yeah, I'm currently in Atlanta in the US.
Okay, so MakerGhat, Azra will give you the quick introduction, but I will share with you my poor understanding of the same. Very quickly, MakerGhat are the folks who will get students to tinker, who will get students to think critically, who will get students to basically come to a happy, safe space, which they have some very interesting labs, which are hopefully going to come up all across India as well. Azra will tell us more about that in the near future. On that note, let me ask you the question so that since I've mangled your introduction quite well, and Azra, can you tell us how the journey of MakerGuard began? Can you tell us a little bit about what MakerGuard does?
Yeah, for sure. And that wasn't too terrible an introduction, but just to sort of set the record straight, MakerGhat, we're a non-profit organization based in Mumbai in Maharashtra. We're located very close to IIT Bombay, actually, in the Powai area. And we have an open maker space where young students from the area can come in and get access to resources, tools, and mentors for hands-on making. And really the core of our mission is to build a movement around hands-on making across India with the goal of encouraging students to become leaders and entrepreneurs of the next generation. So we really believe that hands-on making is a very powerful mechanism for enabling uh, key critical thinking, problem solving skills among our youth, which a lot of times the education system really misses out on instilling in our students. So that's kind of core to what we do, and we have many different programs. We started out though with this core concept of a maker space because that's really the kind of ideal space where we think this kind of learning can happen in. And we were sort of inspired partly by our experiences in the US. So Aditya Vishwanath, my co-founder, and I, we're both currently PhD students in the US. Uh, and his program is in learning sciences and technology at Stanford University. Mine is in the School of Computing at Georgia Tech, and we were both sort of coming at this problem in different ways. So I was looking at it more from a community development kind of lens, and Aditya was looking at it from an educational perspective. And we've both been working with communities in India for several years before we started MakerGhat, and we saw that there was a lot of energy, a lot of exciting ideas, a lot of interest among youth, especially youth who are underserved and going to schools where they didn't get access to resources for their ideas, but no real platforms for them to do this kind of work, right? Like we see this kind of thing maybe in some of these new robotics camps and new kind of like new age sort of programs in India. And we see a lot of this happening in the US, for instance. And both of us got this exposure during our undergrad also in the US. And we wanted to really create those spaces for young people, especially from underserved areas in India. So that's kind of how we started. Like we were just seeing a lot of this happening naturally, but we really wanted to put some money and resources behind this and really foster that movement. Yeah, so that's kind of how we started.
All right, so that's a really nice opening gambit. Now, here's the question. You said that you wanted to create the space where the young adults can come there and they can tinker. At this note, I will tell all our viewers you must go and see the Ned Phelps hypothesis, which is behind a lot of what game has done. And one of the things that they say is that there's a whole movement of people who value, who tinker, who do stuff with their hands, who look at all sorts of those things. And now that I've finished placing games model in the conversation, we'll come back to MakerGuard. Now, my question to you, Azra, is that you said that the students want to go there, and you also said that sometimes the education system doesn't allow this, especially at scale. So, how do you go about convincing, or what is MakerGuard's hope for the ecosystem around the student wherein we want to try and make sure that mom and dad send those young adults to these safe spaces, that their friends encourage them to go there, that there aren't people pulling them away from that. So they're going to learn those 21st century capabilities over there. How do we get society to buy into that?
Yeah, that's a really difficult challenge, honestly, and it's something that I think is going to take a lot of time to really resolve. And I think it's happening in slow steps. So the way MakerGhat looks at it is that there are many different potential channels for this kind of learning to happen. And some of it is that it just needs to happen outside of schools. You know, if schools are not willing to take up this kind of activity in the school curriculum, we have centers outside school that enable kids to get them that kind of platform. But we are also trying to really work with schools to enable that kind of transformation. And some of this is happening because different state governments are starting to see the value in this kind of learning. You also have at a national level the national education policy that has put like front and center these kinds of skills on stage in India. But I think more fundamentally, we are starting to see a realization of what learning should be. It shouldn't just be the sort of rote learning that we've kind of managed to happen at scale across India. We need other kinds of learning as well. We need these kinds of 21st century skills to be instilled as well. So I think that kind of realization is happening slowly. There are many different organizations that are trying to push for these skills in many different ways. Like hands-on making is one of them, but you also have people working in art and theater and all kinds of different ways that are trying to foster many of the same kinds of fundamental 21st century skills. So I think that that movement is happening. It's moving slower than I think any of us would like. But it just requires like constant conversations and negotiations with schools, with governments, and also at the ground level, like increasingly having those conversations with parents as well, right? Like especially trying to shift the model of who's sort of the aspiration, the inspiring role model here. Like we want to move away from like I mean, engineers, doctors, and all of these are important for a functioning society. But there's so many other things that we could be doing, and so many ways we could be realizing our potential. And I think making that, opening up those possibilities, and really helping kids get more role models from their communities who are like someone who's an entrepreneur or someone who's leading a social movement, like building those mentors, I think at a local level are really foundational for having this kind of movement happen at scale. So I think that's a big part of also what we're trying to do, like finding those people who can inspire others within their community. Like I think that is really what will help push forward this kind of learning in the long term.
So here's a question which has struck me along the way. We're probably going to have to convince folks to put aside time, money, resources, spaces for the labs, for the time, for the period dedicated to this kind of stuff, and so on. I think one of the things that the Alliance has enjoyed getting with you all being a part of at least the EMC component is some bits around measurement and evaluation on whether what we're doing is effective or not. Would be great if you could share some of what you're hoping to bring to the programs that we're doing for potential funders, or we're hoping to have regular conversations with people who are interested in measurement and evaluation. So it would be great if you could articulate that, because I don't think that's going to come in any of the other partner spotlights as much. So I'm going to throw this question at you before I move to the next.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think even internally, like as an organization for us, it's really, really important that we determine how our programs are doing, especially if we want to see any kind of meaningful scale of our programs, because this is also a kind of learning that is very different from what school systems are used to integrating, or parents and teachers are used to working with. So it requires a good amount of investment of time and resources. So we have to show that this is working. And as part of that, we do different kinds of measurements. So what we're doing with GAME, for instance, with one of the programs is this notion of embedded assessments, where as students are doing the program, there are different points where we're collecting data on the outputs that students are generating. So whether these are different kind of artifacts that they're creating, whether these are responses to questions, but collecting that over time to see if there's a transformation in terms of some of the key kinds of outcomes that we care about measuring. So around their critical thinking, around their problem solving ability, and some of that gets sort of reflected in, for instance, the kind of questions that students are asking, right? So I think one of the most powerful indicators of critical thinking is just asking really good questions, and that's something that often our programs try to look out for. And then so there's a whole host of tools around that that we do. And then another kind of assessment, which is more typical of educational programs, is doing like a pre-post and ideally midline assessment as well, right? So there it's more sort of giving students a questionnaire and giving them either different kinds of scenarios or different kinds of rating based questions where they respond to how they feel about a certain kind of metric. So maybe, for instance, if it's around confidence, you ask them if they're able to, if they feel confident enough to respond to a new problem, right? So they might rate on a scale of 1 to 5 how confident they feel in that kind of situation. So there are a bunch of different kinds of questions you can ask. There are lots of tools that have already been developed by educational psychologists for this kind of exactly this kind of measurement. And a lot of times we work with our partners to integrate that. And some of the programs, like the one with Andhra Pradesh that we're doing with GAME, integrates that as well. And then another kind of measurement, I guess, that we care about, which is less for the people who are doing the programs and more for the students themselves, is trying to give them opportunities to see how their learning is progressing over time. And I think that's a little trickier for the kind of learning that we do, and it's still something that we're figuring out. But there it's providing rubrics or providing basically tools for students to be able to self-evaluate and self-assess. Because I think more than being told what you're good at or not, it's really powerful if you are able to determine what your skill level is at for a given kind of learning outcome. So part of that is, at the end of some of the workshops that we've developed, we give students this peer assessment framework where we'll be like, okay, like this is what your friend has developed. Now, sort of share what you've done and then rate yourselves based on this given rubric. So that's another kind of assessment that we do, which is more to encourage students to, again, it kind of feeds into everything else you do, collaboration, critical thinking, and so forth. So that's another piece of the kind of stuff we care about.
I'm pretty glad I asked you that question. So just to summarize for the viewer, there are 3 kinds of assessment that we're looking at. One which is inbuilt and is getting generated as the children are going through the process. The second is the more standardized one, which is what I guess the sector is accustomed to, which has got the baseline, midline, endline. And the last and the most, I mean, to me at least, the one which is seeming really interesting and powerful is, I think, for someone to look at themselves and actually say, this is where I'm at and this is where I want to get to. I almost think like if we can achieve that, we've won the battle. Like,
yeah, that's the hardest one probably of all of these.
But it would be really exciting to get there. So if you are the viewer who is going to come and intern with the Game Alliance, we're very welcoming to all sorts of people being part of this movement. You will get to learn some pretty cool stuff around this process, and we'll second you to the MakerGhat folks for the period that you're with us at that stage. Okay, my next question to you, Azra. You signed on with Game, and I think our journey is now about closing in on 6 months, if I'm right. So what do you hope to achieve from the partnership with Game in implementing the entrepreneurial mindset among school, or maybe not school, let's say among young adults in Andhra Pradesh or Karnataka, which is where we've so far gotten off the ground, and hopefully we'll reach many more states?
Yeah, I think for us, it's really exciting to just be part of a consortium of organizations that all care about hands-on sort of this notion of entrepreneurship and hands-on learning, right? And I think there's some really great organizations doing this kind of work, but frequently we don't collaborate because maybe we're just sort of within our different niches and thinking about how to problem solve for a given context. But I think with game, there's it's created this opportunity for us to learn from each other and really strengthen the different kinds of programs we're working on. So I think that is that collaboration piece, I think in itself is really interesting and really powerful. But the other piece is just, I think in terms of movement building, right? Like that is something that requires many different organizations kind of working together to push forward this kind of mission in many different places, because it's not enough to be working in one place. I mean, even if you reach 1,000 students, a lakh, like it's not enough, because India is just so massive, it's so huge. And the education system itself is not just this one monolithic thing, it's many different systems working together at the same time. So I think as part of that, it just really requires a concerted like point of really like someone who's pushing forward that agenda consistently, right? Like even as different organizations work within their different niches. So I think that is something that I think we've really appreciated working with game on, and I think that's really sort of pushed forward what we're able to do in the short and long term. And I think from a long term perspective, I think it's this again, like this movement building that I think for us is really important, and where we're trying to make sure that we're able to collaborate with game effectively as well.
So on that note, the alliance, like game by herself, and I put the gender, and I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to, doesn't execute, and there is beauty and speed in that, and there is also sometimes frustration in terms of it doesn't move as quickly because technically you don't control it, and technically you need to get organizations to maybe buy into the dream, so to speak. So any challenges that you faced in this model of working as an alliance, and what do you think the alliance could do better to solve those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is part of any sort of large group collaboration, right? It's hard to get on the same page because everyone has their own ideas for how things should be done, and everyone's bringing in also a wealth of experience on what has worked for them. So I think that kind of mediation across different kinds of approaches, organizations, tools, like all of that is really hard, but also necessary. And I think it's a slow, like, I mean, it's a learning process for everyone, right? So I don't know if that's necessarily going to change, but maybe there are ways that that whole process can be strengthened, like maybe even having, more sort of concrete, like, I mean, I feel like now there are enough organizations that you can even hold an event for like all of them to be presenting what they're doing to each other and really sort of strengthening their understanding of what others are doing. Like, I think the kinds of conversations possible are really, it's really intriguing because I don't think we've seen many deep conversations about what's happening in these kinds of spaces outside of like small group interactions that we've maybe like individual organizations have had with partners. But I think again now there's this possibility of having those kinds of conversations as well. So I think all of those are really interesting possibilities that could help just smooth out the process of working together a bit.
Incidentally, this morning I was looking at it, and we've crossed 26 different kinds of organizations on the EMC component alone, right?
Yeah,
now.
that's very cool.
And I'm like, okay, we need to move faster, add on more. But I hadn't thought of this one, so I'm actually glad you asked this question. A space where we can bring everyone together and kind of let the agenda be driven by everyone's other ones. I think that's definitely going to be something that we try and execute in the this quarter or the next. Okay, so now question for you is what successes have you seen? And this is beyond the Game Alliance. I'm looking at MakerGhat's own journey. What is it that has kept you going through what we know? In running an organization on philanthropic money is not the easiest thing to do. But can you walk us through some success stories, and what is it that gives you the fuel to wake up every morning and keep plugging away at this problem or this?
Yeah, I think right. I think for us, I mean, we collect data and all of that, but I think the most powerful motivators are really individual stories of students and where they end up. And I think we've been so we had started with one center, and then like within a year and a half or so, COVID hit. So we had to move a lot of our operations online. But during the time that we did have the space active in person, the effects of it we found were present even beyond when the space had to close. So a lot of the students during that time, especially college students, are now working in jobs that like align with their aspirations, right? So uh, and they have aspirations for doing things beyond that. Like there's students who want to create their own like companies or small businesses, and I think those are the kinds of things that really gets us excited. And these are kids who are not going for necessarily like a traditional job. Like there are a lot of students, a lot of their peers are just taking whatever job they can because jobs are scarce, especially since COVID hit. But these are kids who are like, okay, I want to do video game development, or I want to do animation, or I want to like do like start my own app and try to raise money for that. Like these are kids who are able to do those things. So I think that has been really exciting and interesting for us. We also have like kids who, I mean, even beyond like the career sort of level, we have kids who are working on their own projects and developing something that's interesting and exciting for them and the place that they're working on, especially a lot of kind of projects coming around water management and waste management, because those are big challenges in their communities. So those are the kinds of I think uh, stories and things that keep us going. And I think like some of the programs you're doing with you as well, I mean, I think those seeing those kinds of outcomes are really what keeps us excited, because I mean that's the most sort of concrete proof of the kind of creativity that we and energy that we have in the next generation of youth, and we shouldn't lose that through the education system. We need to keep that alive.
So, Azra, this question is something which is striking me as well. The Alliance is looking for spaces to set up these labs, and we're always scoping partners and smelling around and saying, this one looks like where we could set up something. But would you be able to share some numbers? What's it going to cost a community to put a lab together?
Hmm.
Um, I mean,
Yeah, so
like a bare bones version and an ideal
hmm.
version.
Yeah, we've been experimenting with this for a while actually, and what we figured is that so in the space that we were running, our biggest cost was just rent. Like if you can get space for free, whether it's in a school or whether it's an existing community space, nothing like it, because that's the biggest cost, and that's sort of like a continuous cost. But in terms of tools, you can set up a space for like 10,000 rupees. Like it doesn't take much. You can even gather resources, like even if you don't want to spend a lot of money. A lot of maker spaces are set up by just people in a community bringing in tools that they already have and setting it up in a single space and saying that, okay, let's just share what we already have access to. So it really depends on what you just need as a community, like a group of people who want to engage in this kind of hands-on learning, sharing in an open environment. Once you have people, once you have like a physical space, then the tools will come. Like you can invest like 10,000 rupees, and we have a list of equipment that you can get started with. You can go up to like, I mean, there are spaces that are millions of dollars, because that's just how high end you can get. But it really depends on your local needs, right? Like you can once you have basic infrastructure, you can set up based on tools that you find necessary for the kinds of projects that you're working on. But I'd say like, I mean, in less than 10,000, you can get started with a simple uh, set of tools, especially if you're working with youth and not with like older students or college level students who might be interested in more expensive equipment that's more specialized. You can get started fairly easily. You do have the adult tinkering labs, for instance, which are like 20 lakhs for your school for 5 years. So you can even, I mean, but I mean, honestly, from what we've learned, most of those tools don't get used. You don't need something that's high end.
That's really heartening to know, because the Alliance will also measure ourselves on how many we will reach and how many will actually respond and how many will change, but at what cost per student? Because that's something that we definitely want to be able to keep. And that's really heartening to hear. And I will share that there are lots of our partners who are saying, hey, we've got a space and let's set it up. So hopefully by the time we have you for our next conversation, we'll probably have some pictures in the background, or at least have you maybe doing it for us over there. All right. On that note, in the entrepreneurial mindset is learning from failure. So, like every organization which is finding its feet, can you walk us through some of the more spectacular failures that you all have had, and what you learned from it, and what is it that our students who may be listening to this could pick up from that?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the biggest gap for us was just when COVID hit, right? Like our whole model was a failure because it can't work in a COVID environment. It's so based on in-person interactions. It's based on kids coming to a physical space. That we just had to rethink our entire model as an organization when that happened, and I think that's when we were forced to get creative. A lot of our learnings for how we want to scale came from that period, like in terms of working a lot more closely with organizations that are, building spaces like this or are interested in building spaces like this, thinking about where the resources come for this kind of activity. I think a lot of that thinking happened when the original model was no longer really possible in the way we had envisioned. So I mean, I think that's just part of the journey, right? Like, I mean, we have COVID now, something else will hit in a year from now, probably. So we'll have to reinvent at that point again.
All right. The good thing is that the Alliance, of course, hopes to be ready for that one, because we do believe that learning will continue. So here's a question. What is the support that you would want from the ecosystem around MakerGhat, around the Alliance, and around the student to try and make this process easier? So one, of course, is if you are a real estate mogul and you've got a room to spare. How big is the room you need, by the way, Azra? For
We
the
recommend like 1,000 square feet, ideally, but you can get started with a single room. Uh, yeah.
So one way, of course, is that from the ecosystem where we could get. But could you articulate some of that, like around MakerGhat, around the Alliance, around the student? What would you wish for the ecosystem to do, and like low hanging fruit over there?
Mhm. Yeah, I guess in terms of um, uh, I don't know if any of these are low hanging fruit, to be honest, because the you're doing is a little, I mean, it's meant to be a little hutke, right? From like, that's how you're trying to push forward change in the education system. But I think definitely we are very interested in creating like networks of spaces. Like there's, so one piece of the puzzle is building a single space, right? Where you can have kids come in, you can have community members come in, you can get resources and all of that. And I think if people are able to provide space and start these kinds of spaces themselves, we are happy to provide the resources to set it up, help you locate funding if necessary, or provide funding if we can figure that out. Like all of that support we're ready to provide. I think you need the people, you need the space, and you can get started. So definitely that's one piece of it. But the other is just, I think, the kind of sharing that can happen across spaces and the kind of learning that can happen across spaces. I don't think there are organizations that are doing that kind of work, and I guess like we benefit, for instance, is doing that kind of like community sharing as well. But I think there's a lot more of that needs to happen, and I think that possibility is really exciting for us. And it was actually one of the things that we were really looking forward to before COVID hit, and now we're seeing that evolve in different ways, but still not quite in terms of the ideal kind of scenario where you have networks of spaces that are having really deep and meaningful exchange of ideas and exchange of knowledge. So that is, I think, something that we hope will happen over the next few years, and definitely something that we're super excited about. And I think even in terms of just like, So one thing we've realized is that there isn't really a shortage of um, I guess like resources and tools for this kind of work. It's just that they're located in places that you sometimes don't expect them to be located. And I think figuring out those channels so that this kind of work can happen more effectively, like figuring out the spaces for this kind of work to be welcome. I think like that kind of identification is again like place where game can help, place where other organizations can also help, and just say like, we are interested in having this kind of space, and then we're ready to make those make magic happen, I guess.
Question: how much time should a young adult be spending in the space every week, ideally, for
Yeah,
to
I
have?
mean, yeah, I would say that the more time they spend, the better, of course. But we do say that around around 40 hours in total ideally is what we'd like for there to be a meaningful impression on the student. And this
Over
can
how many months? 40 hours over how many months?
over like maybe like 6 months to a year. That's kind of what we recommend, but we do have programs that are like 20 hours or even like workshop style. And even those, we see students being really excited and inspired afterwards. But I mean, it's hard to tell how long that motivation will continue with a one-time experience. So we recommend a more extended experience for that reason.
So, I mean, as always, I'm always thinking on those lines. Is it ideal to have these spaces in high traffic spaces where young adults go and they have to wait? So, for
So
example, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking a bus station, I'm thinking a railway
hmm,
station where you have to wait. You got time, you got stuff to work, or is it somewhere near like the canteen in college, or it's somewhere near. Is it those kind of spaces where things like this need to be pushed in high traffic, time on hands kind of spots?
I think that could be really interesting. It really depends on like if we can get that space. I think it's very easy to think of many creative places where you could have such kind of spaces. It's a lot harder to find someone who's willing to give you that space. And I mean, I think the easiest place like where there's high traffic is schools and universities, right? Like that's where kids are going every day, and that's kind of what a lot of organizations try to do, is get space on the timetable or get space in the school or university so you can do this kind of thing. The challenge there is that once a space enters that kind of environment, it frequently also takes up the culture of that school or university, and it's hard to push for a different culture unless people are willing for that culture shift to happen. But I think, I mean, just like in terms of sustainability, long term, I think those are really the places where this kind of work needs to happen. It's just that we need to do a lot of work for making sure the culture shifts in that school, and it's not the space that's becoming yet another classroom, but the school system that's transforming because of the space.
You identified the dichotomy and the challenges facing the alliance. Get on the timetable, get into the school, you have a chance for scale. Get on the timetable, get into school, and you put it off in someone's mind saying, I don't want to do this because I'm forced to go there. So, yeah, I guess we have to figure out those questions. So, on that note, that brings me to my final question for the evening. So, 2021, to be signing off on the academic year, since we talk in terms of academic years and not financial years, as a successful one, what is it that you would hope for MakerGhat to have achieved?
Hmm. Yeah. I think for us the biggest piece right now is to really see a few programs through. Like we haven't done anything at the state level before. Like this is a lot of the programs we're doing with game are uh, sort of focusing at that level of scale. So really, doing the start to finish effectively from the program design, curriculum development, and program implementation, monitoring and evaluation, and ideally showcasing the kinds of outcomes you want to see. I think that is really the key goal for us this in 2021. And I think sort of related to that, another kind of I guess more of like a question that we're trying to resolve or trying to figure out is that a lot of what's happening now is that many states are really focused on getting the foundational skills right, and making sure that those are not um, like there isn't a huge loss of learning there because of the pandemic and school closures and all of that. So I think for us, we're also trying to see if there are ways that we can align in meaningful ways with what state governments care about. Like, are there spaces for us I don't know if like foundational skills is really the right space, but even are there ways that our programs can further strengthen those skills as well, right? Because even if it's not a primary outcome, it is part of what we do. Like, a lot of what we see is that as confidence builds in the student, it has a ripple effect in other kinds of uh, programs they're part of as well. So trying to build those kinds of connects, trying to figure out what is the right value proposition, so to speak, for different states and different school systems is something that we're trying to figure out, and I think will take some time to really get right over the year.
All right, Azra, on that note, I will also share with you that I've put down an internal target for Game EMC to hit 1 million students. So it looks like you're going to be climbing on that bandwagon with us. On that,
Okay, amazing.
on that happy note, we will end this conversation. It's a pleasure having MakerGhat on board with us for this evening's chat. And of course, on this journey to try and reach those students at scale, because even with 1 million, we're only scratching the surface. But the journey is looking interesting. And as long as you all stay with us, I think it's going to be fun. Thank you very much, Azra, for your time this afternoon. And we look forward to having you back for the next spotlight, hopefully in one of those labs. On
Thank you,
some,
Shiv. Yeah.
or at a railway station. That's my new mad plan for this evening. Okay, no, that's really pushing my luck. All right.
Oh, that'll be amazing. Hope to see you there.
Azra,
Bye. Bye.
on that note, I'm going to sign off.